We don't all end up homeless and in prison due to our addiction. In this episode, Donna and I talked to longtime entrepreneur, business coach, and alcoholic in recovery, David Greer. We talked about building relationships, personal growth, and learning to think differently. But before we get into that, what's up? My name's Dan, podcaster, keynote speaker, and advocate, and this is Hard Knocks Talks, your addictions podcast. If you're interested in fostering productive conversations about substance use in your community, organization, or event, reach out to me at daniel@hardknockstalks.com to learn more about our public speaking and live podcast production opportunities. Now, let's get into our talk with Coach David Greer.
This is Hard Knocks Talks.
So, David, something that really interested me when you're someone on your team reached out to me, and you are a business coach in recovery, and you have a story to share, and I can't wait to hear it. But it sounds to me like you work with a lot of people in recovery who are also entrepreneurs or who would like to be entrepreneurs. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so that's so as a business coach, I specializing in helping entrepreneurs that are challenged by alcoholism or addiction. And I've not found another business coach that focuses in that way. And in addition to being a business coach, I'm a 40+ year entrepreneur. So I know what it's like to drink as an entrepreneur, and I know what it's like to recover as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So, I was going to say something. So yeah, it's, I've heard it said before and I would believe it, because I have the alcoholic or the addicted mind, that once we find meaning in our life and we find a productive way to point that desire to feel better, we become unstoppable. Like some of the biggest entrepreneurs in the world have had struggles with alcohol. Interesting.
Well, and part of my story, I built a very successful software business while my disease progressed, and while I was a very active alcoholic, and fueled the business with alcohol.
Well, why don't you tell us about it then? Where did this all get started for you?
My story is very much the progressive nature of the disease. And, while I had aspects of myself that didn't fit in, I was also a super high performing individual, one of the top academics. I was sports center of the year, my graduating class. So, had a lot of things going for me. And a lot of my story is the story of being a high performing alcoholic. My father wanted me to take over the family business. And in grade 9, I visited Edmonton as the provincial capital. And I remember going on a field trip where we visited like some IT services for the government of Alberta. When I was 18, I did one term of computer science at the University of Alberta. And then I was tired of school. I was in love. I quit university. I followed my high school girlfriend who had moved out to Vancouver. And January of 1976, I left home and moved out to Vancouver. And 9 months later, she broke up with me. So first heartbreak of my life.
And how old were you?
I was 18.
18. Oof.
18. Yeah. So eventually I went back to university, and I got a job with two brilliant entrepreneurs. They were way, way ahead of their time. I had no idea, but it's kind of a story of my life. I'm always kind of with people that are on the bleeding or leading edge of things. And I don't even, it just becomes my norm. So I get my computer science degree. I get a part-time job with the cable company, which at the time was the largest cable company in North America. And there was an IT system that wasn't working. It was getting rewritten. And this consultant was leading the rewrite. And he had just launched a product for this computing platform made by Hewlett Packard, which became a very successful computer company. But I got to know him, and eventually they agreed to hire me before I graduated from UBC as the first employee of their company.
When did things start to go sideways for you?
I wasn't an alcoholic yet, I don't think. But I went to that conference. I remember one night there was like a really big dinner, and there was a fellow there from Hungary, and I tried to outdrink him with wine and got just pissed. And I walked back to my hotel, and this car races up to the curb, and two girls lean out, and they're asking if I want their services. and I don't notice that they completely pickpocket me. So I get back to the hotel, and like everything's got stolen, and I got to talk to the police. I got to call American Express to get my traveler's checks, canceled. And
So you went with them?
I
Is what
went.
you're saying?
No, I did not go with them.
How'd they pick your pockets then, Dave? How'd they pick your pockets?
No, but I walked up close enough to the car, and they were
Okay.
reaching out, shall we say.
Okay.
So there's an early, example. So, when did I become a pickle is a few years later, my wife, Carolee, got pregnant with our daughter, Jocelyn. And Carolee committed to, our firstborn. And Carolee committed to stop drinking during the pregnancy. And I committed to support her by not drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And that lasted a day. And I don't know to this day how I squared it with Carolee, like how I made it whole, but I just went back to drinking. And by then I was probably daily drinking, not in the quantities that I was drinking at the end. Now, I'm sure I was a pickle before then. I just can't tell you like exactly.
There was no pinnacle moment where you turned into a pickle.
That's why for me, it's very much the progressive nature of the disease and just the accumulation, of drinking and drinking and drinking.
Well, it sounds like you had a lot of social engagements and different things where, that sort of a thing is accepted.
Yeah.
And it can go undetected as well.
And just thinking now, you've sort of piqued my own interest, and I looked introspectively here, and like I don't remember the exact moment where things like, I mean, they definitely got super bad, but it was like, putting the toad in the water and then turning the heat up slowly, right? Like when is the one point where you're actually in trouble? And I don't know, but it definitely got hot.
And for me, there was, even really to the end, there was no consequence to my external consequence. There was internal consequences. There's no external consequence to my drinking. And then, 10 years into building this business, Annabelle decided to retire. And she offered for me to buy out her shares. And I had to take kind of all the money that I had made and put aside in the previous 5 years as a down payment. And then I borrowed the money from her, and I had 3 years to pay it back in quarterly payments. And if I missed a single payment, she could claim the shares back. So it was kind of it's very entrepreneurial deal. But I remember leaving, so I'm like early mid 30s. I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I left an accountant's meeting downtown where we're like working on how the structure would be. And I had tears coming down my face. Like it was that stressful. I'm sure I went home and drank. I don't remember going home and drink, but I guarantee you I did.
Maybe that's why you don't remember. You went home and drank.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
And I ended up buying her out, and it was a success. But now, like, I've arrived because now I'm like co-owner. I can do more of what I want. My ego, my head gets bigger. Because I'm a big shot. Like I already was a big shot, but now I'm a big shot. And I still use alcohol to fuel, the highs being higher and the lows being a little, not so low. And we roll forward 10 years, and the original founder and I had a major disagreement about the future of the company. We could see that the computing platform we specialized in, HP, was going to end it at some point. We didn't know exactly when. And, a lot of business around strategy. His strategy was, let's milk, the market until it's all gone and we turn out the lights and close the doors. And I'm like, we built this incredibly specialized team. They do a lot of things that no other software vendor can do. Let's take a little more money, a little more risk, and move it in new directions. I actually believe both strategies were viable, but they were not complementary at all. And, I like to say that Bob and I only had one major disagreement in 20 years, but it was a doozy, and it ended in divorce. And he ended up buying me out. So there I am in early 2001, tech entrepreneur. Haven't noticed there's this thing called the dot-com meltdown. So I'm busy chasing deals. When someone smarter than me, I met through networking, and trying to find my next opportunity. And she sat me down in her office after we'd had lunch together, and she said, David, your kids will never be 11, 9, and 5 again. Like, do you need to work right away? And I'm like, no, I just got a really big check in my jeans. I'm not done for life, but I don't have to work right away. And when she told me that when she'd had a career break, she'd flown to Australia and bought a VW van and toured around for a year. And so my wife and I,
look at Don. I saw Donna's face light up, and I'm like, that sounds, because we were just talking just before, we should get a camper maybe, and she's like, oh, what if it breaks down? And I'm like, yeah, you're probably right.
So we hatched a plan. We commissioned a sailboat in the south of France, and we homeschooled our 3 kids for 2 years while sailing more than 5,000 nautical miles, about 10,000 kilometers in the Mediterranean.
Holy moly. That's awesome.
And
challenging. That's not for the faint of heart. Now, and I'm not a sailor. I really know nothing of it, but I would.
Homeschooling part is impressive.
Yeah. Didn't you ever want to just jump into the ocean and swim away? I'm swimming for it.
Yep. In fact, we talked about doing a 3rd year, but we could not face another year of homeschooling. Truth be told.
Sharks be damned.
I will say the Mediterranean was a fantastic place to drink. Beer costs less than half what it costs in Canada. Wine costs about 1/3. It's much better. Every single port you pull into has a restaurant, which is really a restaurant and a bar right next to where you're moored. It's great. But a couple things happened there that I didn't know it at the time, but when I finally got sober, I think they were little taps from the universe. So one was we did a lot of overnight passages, like where you go for 24 hours, 48 hours, or 72 hours nonstop on passage, including through the night. And on our second overnight passage, we were in the Western Mediterranean Sea, like south of France, but out in the middle of the Med. And my son, who was 10 at the time, came on watch with me because he did watches with me. Our daughter did watches with my wife. And I said, you take the port side or the left side of the boat and look out for boats. And I'll take the starboard side. And that night, we just kept getting spooked because all above us was the Milky Way as far as we could see. And we kept mistaking stars on the horizon for lights of other boats. And I think it was really a time that the universe was trying to touch me. And certainly as I've come to get to know a power greater than myself, that night and that experience has formed as being an important part of it. The other thing is, after being a daily drinker now so Jocelyn's 12. So for at least 12 years, I've been a daily drinker, maybe probably more. Every time we were on passage, I put down the drink, and I didn't even think about putting down the drink. I just did not drink because the lives of my family were at stake.
Let's take a quick break here. I'm going to shout out some sponsors, and then we'll continue on. So, if you are struggling with the substance use of a loved one or have tragically lost a loved one to drug-related harms, reach out to Stronger Together Canada peer-led support groups by Mum Stop the Harm. If you are in search of private inpatient addictions treatment, check out Prairie Sky Recovery Centre located in Leipzig, Saskatchewan. If you are looking for help with criminal record suspensions, the Elizabeth Fry Society of Saskatchewan covers all associated costs for women or gender-diverse individuals to apply for criminal record suspensions. Reach out to Chelsea at 306-668 0635. If you are a professional wishing to deepen your understanding of substance use disorder, check out the AIMS SK program through the College of Medicine at the University of Saskatchewan, designed to help you improve health outcomes for individuals with substance use disorder. To make contact or learn more about all of today's sponsors, to check out our new merch, or if you want to show us some love and buy us a coffee, all of those links are in the show notes below. So, David, was it on this boat that you made the decision to put the bottle down?
Nope. And I'm going to just kind of fast forward the story and go through the next few years. So we came back. I'm unemployed, and I spent 3 years as an angel investor looking at startups, technology startups, I'd look at about 100 a year, invest in one, work on the board of directors, work for options. I did that for 3 years, and I didn't realize how awfully unfulfilling that was for me. Like, most of those entrepreneurs were like, it's because when I was 22, 24, 25 years old, like I just grew this business by the seat of my pants. And so, I'm trying to work with entrepreneurs that are 25 rungs down the ladder, and it takes me a year to get them up one rung. Like, I'm just not working with people that are at my level. And then I took one of my young CEOs to a training event with a guy by the name of Vern Harnish, who has a template that a lot of my entrepreneurial technology friends in Vancouver really, really believed in, called the one-page strategic plan. And so I took her there to go learn about this. It turns out I learned a whole bunch about it, and it really changed how I think about strategic planning and planning for a business. But more importantly, at the back of the room were two coaches, and two business coaches, and I talked to both of them. And one of them, Coach Kevin Lawrence, made me more uncomfortable than I had been in a few years. In fact, I had tears in the corner of my eyes. And, I was telling him kind of what I was doing and how I couldn't find anyone more at my level to help. And Kevin just said, he looked around the room and he said, "Look, David, there's probably 100 people in this room, and probably every one of them needs your help." And, I hadn't found a way to break in or be part of that. And so I took Kevin's card, and Kevin's card sat next to my phone at my home office for about 3 weeks. And about once a week, I'd think about calling him, and the phone would weigh about 10,000 pounds. Thankfully, after about 3 weeks, Kevin called me, and he said, "Hey, this is Coach Kevin. We met at the Vern Harnish event. Do you remember me?" Which I reply, "Yes," while my brain is going, "Yeah, Kevin, like I haven't really thought about much else for 3 weeks." And I ended up hiring him. And we had our first coaching day together on my 50th birthday, August 9th, 2007. And at that time, when Kevin is like me, he's all in or all out. There's no like in between. So when you started working with Kevin at that time as a one-on-one coach, you did 2 8-hour days back to back. That was our opening coaching session, 16 hours together. So pretty intense. And I worked with Kevin for 9 years, but after we started working together, we worked together for 18 months, and we like cleared out like all the clutter on the table, all the things that were kind of impeding me, till like the elephant in the room was the only thing that was left. And I believe that the universe put Kevin in my path so I could get sober. And on January 26, 2009, I drank my last beer. I'm an OCD organized person. So like I figured out how many beers I was going to buy. I was making sure there was no extras in the house. Had my last beer probably at 10:30 at night. And I sent an email to Kevin because we had a coaching call the next day. And the way we structured it is I always sent the topic the day, the night before. And I said, the topic for our coaching call is my drinking.
So hang on now. What did he... What influence did he have? Did he notice that you were drinking and sort of was like poking away or digging away at it a little bit? Or is this something that you believe that just through his coaching, you came to this realization on your own?
Literally, like, I think I just conceded defeat. And again, Kevin was as surprised as everyone else was. I was super high performing alcoholic, so no one knew that I was an alcoholic.
Oh, he
Everyone
didn't
was
even
shocked. Had no idea.
Really?
Had no idea whatsoever. Well, and all our calls are, and most of the time we're on the phone, and it's almost always during the day, and I don't start drinking until late in the afternoon. So I'm not like inebriated any time on our calls, right? And so Kevin, that was Tuesday, January 27th, 2009, and Kevin got me. So he coached me to go to the best known 12-step program. And which I had a tremendous aversion to, and I don't even know today why I had an aversion to it. Like, I think it's probably just the stigmatism of alcoholism. Anyways, he coached me through that, and I agreed with Kevin that I would go to a meeting by that Friday. And that meeting at that time was in a Legion. And so I walk in and I go through the outer door, and the inner door to the bar is like open. And there's like 3 tables that have beers on them.
This
and
is
I'm
amazing.
I'm standing there like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah.
And, a couple 12-step people come by me, and they have that, sixth sense that we have. And they look at me and they go, "Oh, are you looking for a meeting? You should go down the hall and up the stairs."
Mm-hmm. And
I turned right and I went down the hall and I went up the stairs, which I later learned those actually were exactly 12 steps, coincidentally. I went in, I didn't sit in the back row, but there was like a central corridor. And at that point in that meeting, they asked for newcomers about 3/4 of the way through the meeting. And the chairperson said, "Is there anyone new to the program which would like to stand and introduce themselves by their first name only?" And I sat on my hands, and fortunately the chairperson waited quite a while, probably 20, 30 seconds.
Felt like an eternity.
It did. That absolutely felt like an eternity, but I did jump up at the end and say, "I'm David, I'm an alcoholic." And
how'd that feel?
That scary, uncertain. I didn't know what it meant. Mm-hmm. I celebrated 15 years a week ago yesterday from this when we're recording this. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Amazing. And that particular meeting, a couple of weeks later, I made my home group. So I've been involved with it for a very long time. And the chairperson's notes, even today, say, "Ask if there's anyone new. Pause for 20 or 30 seconds because they're scared."
Nice.
Because we like to watch the newcomers twist out because they haven't twisted out enough yet in their life.
So anyways, that was the start of my journey in the program, and I got a temporary sponsor that night who is actually still a member of that home group. So I still see him on a regular basis. That's, that group is what I credit with my, the universe eventually got me to understand a God of my understandings and a power greater than myself. But it was listening to those men over and over share their kind of vision or how they came to an understanding, and me listening to their lived experience that let me figure it out for myself. Mm-hmm. Also, let's go ahead, Daniel.
Did you have an aversion? Yeah, I sometimes I give out social cues and I don't even realize it. Did you have an affinity or like a resistance to spirituality before this came along?
Spirituality, absolutely not. But the God word was the sticking point.
Man, yeah,
and
I hear that so often.
But so here's why it was a sticking point for me was I kept associating it with the Western version of Christian God. Mm-hmm. So like going to the Sistine Chapel and sitting there and looking up, and God's, Michelangelo painted God with gray hair, and, kind of pointing the finger at Jesus. And then at the end wall is the day of judgment, and it's like God sitting there judging whether people go to heaven or hell. And like my God, which is just for me a 3-letter word that means a power greater than myself, but my higher power doesn't judge me. It only wants the best for me. Mm-hmm. It cares for me. It loves me unconditionally. And these things were not my understanding of a Christian Western God. So there's where the disconnect happened. But over time, as I say, I just eventually got to a point where now God equals a power greater than myself. Like that's really what it means to me. So I can say the word very comfortably. I look at the gifts I've got from Coach Kevin and I decide I want to give those gifts to other entrepreneurs. So I make the choice to become a coach. So I take my coach training. I write a business book called Wind in Your Sails, Vital Strategies that Accelerate Your Entrepreneurial Growth, and launched all of that in 2015. And start becoming a business coach. And I also am a facilitator around strategic planning. And this guy, Vern Harnish, remember he was back in the story, right? Where I met Coach Kevin. I specialize in his framework. It's called Scaling Up, and his 1-page plan. And that's the framework that I have the most experience and knowledge in. So I facilitate strategic planning using that with entrepreneurs and their senior executive team. So a lot of that's over half of my work. Is doing that kind of strategic planning. And then Kevin decided to stop one-on-one coaching. he referred me to his coach, Nan O'Connor, out of Atlanta. And Nan has been my coach since. We celebrated 7 years together last month. Cool. And Nan was a very different, Kevin is kind of the hard-driven entrepreneur and kind of was really what I needed at that time. And then Nan is still a superb coach and keeps me accountable, but is, she's a sexual abuse survivor. She's written a book about it. We have really deep coaching calls around much deeper issues, relationships, around, personal growth, that then shows up in my coaching work. It's really funny how this all happens. It's like when I do a really big period of personal growth work in one of my 12-step programs, because I'm also an ACA. It starts showing up. And, Carolee and I, for 30 years, we never did any real work on our relationship. And then the last decade, we did 8 years of relationship counseling. So now when I'm working with partners and they're at loggerheads with each other, I have all these tools that I learned in relationship counseling, because it turns out they apply with any two people. Imagine. But what Nan kind of was on me for a couple of years and just saying, every time you talk about recovery, your energy is so pure. And every time I ask you anything, you always have, the answer, it's just there, whether it's life or business. And so, with her encouragement about 3 years ago, I decided to out myself and make the decision to become very public about my recovery and to publicly, tell people that I was focusing on helping entrepreneurs with alcohol or addiction problems. It turns out that naturally I had attracted a couple of those anyways. Right.
Interesting.
Right. Maybe not too surprisingly.
Yeah.
And then, I've come on a lot of podcasts like this to talk about recovery first, but to also talk about, entrepreneurs. Only about 10% of the population ever become entrepreneurs. You got to be semi-crazy to become an entrepreneur.
You have to be all the way crazy to become an entrepreneur. Don't
don't sugarcoat it.
Yeah. And I know that from personal experience, and Donna knows that from watching my personal experience. I mean, Donna has seen sides of me that the world hasn't seen. And sometimes when the world's not looking, I freaking melt down, because this is hard, man. It ain't easy. It's not for the faint of heart. And I'm not trying to brag myself up, because I've barely scraped by the, skin of my teeth more than once.
And, I really want to acknowledge, we talked before tonight's episode, in 3 years, you've done over 250 episodes. That is, to me, that is an amazing achievement.
Well, thank you.
No, really. I mean, that is truly amazing. And, shows your dedication and your hard work. And, I can tell, you couldn't have done that if you were not super committed to this and, putting in the time and the effort.
I was jealous for a little while.
I was jealous until I saw how crazy it makes him. And now I'm not jealous anymore.
And there's, whether it's workaholism, alcoholism, addiction, it's very easy as an entrepreneur to need or want to have coping mechanisms because of the difficulty of what you take on. And then there's also I work with some very successful entrepreneurs. When you're really successful, then you often get involved in more charity giving, which means you go to more galas, which means you go to more networking events. And guess what? When you're an entrepreneur, in a community like Vancouver, I don't know what it and I think in many other communities, there's a lot of people who want access to you, service providers. And so free networking events with a lot of free booze are very common. So if you're an entrepreneur and you are interested, you do want to network because you want to either help people or you want to help build your business. So how do you cope in those networking events when people keep offering you booze? I mean, in recovery, I just coach them through some of the things that are fairly common in recovery, but I just really have to remind them, do you have an exit plan? Do you always have something in your hand? Do you have a drink in your hand always? A glass of water, for me, it's a cranberry and soda, or Diet Coke or like whatever you want, but just never be without something in your hand so that when people, offer you a drink, you can say, oh, I'll have another glass of water, or you can say, I'm fine.
Uh-huh.
So it's really, how do you cope? I deal with entrepreneurs who deal in high-end sales. And the typical mode is when you're getting close to the closing the sale, the CEO has to fly down to the prospect, has to meet the boss's boss, often the boss's boss's boss, like the chief financial officer of the business. You'll go out for dinner. One of my clients a couple of years ago said, I was down in, I forget where it was, and we, with sales team and we met with their team and we went out for dinner. Everybody had a couple drinks before dinner and then we drank a bottle of wine each. And he said, is that like normal? And I said, well, in closing sales situations, yeah, that's very normal. And then you probably have drinks afterwards. But it's very alcoholic drinking. Like I can't speak whether they're alcoholics, but to have that's 7 drinks in a row without a break.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Because a bottle of wine is 5 drinks. And again, it's like I would coach him. He wasn't an alcoholic, but I coached him. How do I cope in those situations?
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of help him have some coping ways to deal with those kind of situations, because he just didn't want to drink that much, and felt obliged to.
That sounds like a whole nother world. Like I deal with, like I close sponsorship deals and things like that. But I mean, like, I don't jump on a plane and fly down and talk to some chief financial officer. And like, that's a whole new level of stress, man. And like, for me, like as an entrepreneur, and I know that you can relate, like when you close that deal or when you like, make that sale or whatever, like that's the fix. Like that puts you like you're flying when that happens. So, I mean, I could see that being a pretty dangerous place to be, like in such a high stakes thing where you're like flying down and the boss's chief financial officer and everyone's wearing suits and fancy hotels and Bentleys, like that's a high game.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And like, is your sponsor's phone number, like if you're in our program of recovery, is your sponsor's name like at the top of the favorites list, read on speed dial, ready to go?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so you can step out of the dinner and like just have a call, and if you got 5 other people in recovery who are the next 5 people in your speed dial. So if the sponsor's not available, you just like call through the list till you talk to someone who's a recovering alcoholic and just talk to them for 5 minutes. Because oftentimes that's all we need, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if we're not like really close to picking up a drink, but like we're just the smell, like everything is like off-putting, but you're still expected to be there, right? It's like, okay, talk to a person in recovery, like, and make sure that and maybe you have an exit plan. Like you need to catch the flight early in the morning. So, you warn the sales team and you make sure that the business part of the discussion happens with appetizers. And then you leave at dessert. Right. But you set it up ahead of time so that the other side isn't thinking like you're bailing. Like you just set it up that, I'm going to need to leave early. And so, but I want to be here and I want to make sure we cover off on, this and this or whatever we want to talk about. And I often coach around this when even with new clients or existing clients is if you're going to set goals actually for 3 areas of your life. So for your business, career, how much money you want to make, for your life, but then set some very specific goals for yourself. Like what regenerates your energy? What creates resiliency for you? Like, and oftentimes, like sometimes it's going out and doing things with special friends of yours. For me, it's like getting out of Grey, Vancouver and coming to Puerto Vallarta. Well, I came to the Sobriety Under the Sun conference, which was a great hit of AA and Al-Anon. And then, I'm living and working here and getting a lot of sunshine every day because I do get kind of, I don't think I formally have SAD, seasonal affective disorder, but I do like feel it drag on me. And it probably won't surprise you. Like sometimes I just go off for a week on my sailboat, like with no one else. right? I mean, I love having other people in the sailboat, but sometimes like doing a 4-hour passage just by myself is a meditative, like and for sailing, you have to be 100% present. Like you can't be mind wandering because like, especially in Georgia Strait in BC, there's a hell of a lot of logs. So you got to always have a lookout for other boats, for logs. You got to see how the wind's changing, whether you have to change your sails. Like it's, and also sailing for me, and especially very challenging sailing, is my connection to the universe, because you only control a few tiny things on your boat, and the universe controls how strong is the wind, the universe, how big are the waves, the universe. Like you can choose your direction, right? And how much sails you got up, but it's all really reactive to what's happening around you. And it really puts me in touch with my higher power and reminds me that my higher power is in charge. Like it's saying what's going on.
I love that.
That's super awesome.
Yeah.
Love it.
I had
so in goal setting and everything, I always, my goals for the year, it's like I always make sure stuff is carved out that's just for me. And as a codependent, like doing this at first was very, very hard.
Why is
and
that?
My spouse didn't always, because my spouse didn't agree with my going away by myself without her.
Oh.
Because we were codependent.
Okay. So she was mad that you were having experiences without her?
Yeah. Or
I mean, we don't want to start taking her inventory here, but I mean, is that is that the feeling that you were left with?
That would be the
right
feeling. No, she's not. She's upstairs at the pool, so that she doesn't make any noise or isn't in the background for this interview. So, like, part of my personal growth and getting past my codependency was like, I remember the first time 7 or 8 years ago, I went up to Whistler for 4 or 5 days by myself. Like, and like I said, are we doing anything this week? Is anything on? Is there anything I should know about? No. Well, I'm letting you know, I'm going to head up to Whistler for 5 days.
So can I ask, does she do the same? Like, does she?
Is she like, fine, yeah, she doesn't. I'm going to go too, somewhere else.
She has come to really appreciate the time on her own to do, and she can like mess up the house or, we just have different ways that we like things to be. Yeah. And after 41 years, we know how to get along and make it work. But sometimes, it
sounds to me like you know how to not get along too.
Yes. Yeah.
In that 8 years of work that you did in your relationship counseling, what was there like a turning point? Because I mean, it sounds to me, and when you just admitted that you're both very codependent, was there a pinnacle moment or something that was said, a realization that sort of shifted that in your relationship, or has it been just like a slow going, ongoing process?
So again, a really progressive nature of kind of that work, but I would say on our 4th go round, like 4th therapist, and each therapist was good in their own right, and I think was appropriate for the time. But the last one is a recovering alcoholic and drug addict who had an extremely traumatic childhood, really traumatic, very active in 12-step work, and super, super trained relationship counselor. And like the other ones were not 12-steppers. They weren't in recovery. And I think that partly made a difference. So the aha moment was with her when I suddenly realized I didn't need to defend myself, or that if I was defending myself, I was like, that's where the problem was. Because
didn't need to defend yourself to your wife?
Yeah, exactly. Like I still tend to get in defensive mode. Well, I need to do this because blah, 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 blah.
She'll be mad.
Or, no, she might not be anything. But I'm still defending myself.
You feel the need to explain everything.
Yes, and I need to justify everything. Yeah. Whereas, again, it's really it's a self-esteem issue as well as a codependent issue. It's like I'm whole, and like the whole so it's Sue Diamond Potts is the name of this therapist, and her model is interdependence. So this idea that each of us can stand on our own, we could live perfectly good lives totally on our own. But we choose to lean in and have an interdependent relationship so we can make something that's even more beautiful than just the parts. But at any time, we can still stand on our own 2 feet and be adults, make adult decisions, and not be dependent on one or the other. And we are not totally dependent on the other person to meet all of our wants. We have other people in our life who, can fill in. And, there might be some things like I can't go out and have a glass of wine with Carol Lee. And sometimes she likes to do that. And she has other friends she can do it with. Right? And I can't, right? I can't fill that. I mean, we go out to dinner together, right? But I'm not having wine. So it was really understanding when I'm defending, and this has really helped in my coaching too, because if I'm like kind of really jumping on my bandwagon and saying you have to do it this way, which is just kind of another form of defensiveness, then I'm not really coaching. Because coaching is just, hey, in my experience, I found this works better. A works better, and you're suggesting B, but it's totally up to you whether you want A or B. That's up to you, right? All I can do is, one of the things that Coach Kevin told me in the first meeting we had in the back of the room at the Burn Harness training session was, David, you are going to do whatever you want to do. And I will sometimes point out major pitfalls and potholes that you're likely to fall in if you pursue your particular path. But at the end of the day, it's your path and your choice. And, if you go down that path and you fall into some really major holes, I'll be here to help you pick up the pieces.
So your relationship with your wife developed. Now, in addition to that, I'm sure your relationship with yourself has deepened. Now, what I'm thinking is I'm reminded of a guest that I had. He's a counselor at a treatment center here in Saskatchewan, and he said that he used to go to Al-Anon to better understand the relationship he has with himself as the experiencer and as the observer. Can you give us anything as to maybe help us understand what that looked like for you as your relationship grew?
So I'd say some of the most recent growth in that has come from adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. And I've done all 3 workbooks in ACA. So they have the yellow workbook, which is their workbook for doing the steps, which are basically exactly the same as AA's 12 steps, except the first one has a minor change. But, I've worked the steps the AA way at least 6-8 times, and I've done it with workbooks that have questions that come out of treatment centers and other things. But in ACA, they just asked, it's just a different perspective and ask questions looking back at your family of origin and where you come from and where they come from and that whole history. And last year I finished the Loving Parent Guidebook, which is the latest publication. It's only been out for about 2 years. And that was really a lot of inner child work. It's just peeling the layers and just, so my Taskmaster spirit is actually visualized internally in me by this octopus I have, which used to wrap itself around my heart to protect me from having any negative feelings. But it's also...
Whoa, hang on 1 minute. Let's talk about that. That's amazing what you just said there. I love that. Unpack that for us, please.
So I also did 5 years of therapy work with a brilliant therapist, like a couple of years, then we took a year or 2 break, and then another 3 years. And through some meditation work with her and some work with her, I eventually manifested these visions of internal sea creatures. Not too surprising given my love of ocean and sea.
That checks out.
Yeah. So octopus is one of my really big ones. All my fears are represented by humpback whale. Everything having to do with food, which I sometimes, baked goods are one of my weaknesses. Anyways, they're manifested by my dolphin Mike, and kind of my sexuality is manifested by my dolphin Ed. And I have a beautiful 70-pound Chinook salmon that isn't really an inner child, but is more my loving parent. I call it the wise one. So I have this little menagerie of sea creatures who I pray with every day, actually.
That's incredible.
I pray with them every morning and acknowledge them. And, they're just aspects of myself. And that then led to some of the work with ACA, which has led me to, okay, so I've been able to quiet a lot of the critical voice in my head and reparent myself. I'm not perfect. I don't catch it all the time. And I can, when my taskmaster spirit is really showing up and it's not necessary, again, I can really reparent and work with it, and just show up. I guess I'd like to end with something that's nothing to do with business, but very much to do with life. So I started with, I was conceived in Calgary and born in Edmonton and adopted. And, after 9 years of recovery and 60 years of life, I decided I would go looking for my birth families. And I didn't for a long time because of my codependency with my mom, because I was too afraid of how she would feel or think of my going and doing that. And she'd given off subtle indications that she didn't want me to. And eventually, again, she's an adult. She is welcome to her feelings. And if her feelings are hurt by my going and pursuing this journey that's right for me, they're her feelings. It's still the right journey for me. And I don't need to defend it. It's back to defense, right? I don't need to defend this. It's just the right thing for me. And I found I've since found both my birth families, and I have a constellation of various people. But the first person I called 5 years ago was my birth mother. And she, so I said, I'm calling because, I'm your son. I forget, I'd been coached. I had a counselor I worked with who's helped a lot of reunifications. So anyways, I told her my story and she said, I don't know what you're talking about. So denial. Then I said, well, the people at Alberta Adoption Registry Services, in the file I saw, those damn people, they shouldn't have given you anything.
Oh.
So blame for that thing that she just told me she knew nothing about. And then she said, I want nothing to do with you.
Damn.
And it was just outright rejection. And I replied to her that I had identified other members of the Ridley family. Ridley is my maternal family name. And that I'd be reaching out to them, because oftentimes birth moms will agree to have a relationship once they know that the jig is up and the secret's coming out. And she said, I don't want you to do that. And I said, I can appreciate that, but it's important to me to connect to the Ridley family. And so I will be. And that was the end of the conversation. And a little bit later, I emailed my sister, Wendy, and I told her a 3-paragraph story and the fact that Terry didn't want anything to do with me and that I was her brother. And they called Aunt Marvy, who was the 4 years older sister of my birth mom, and said, was there a baby? And Aunt Marvy said, yes, there was. Plus, I look like all of them. So, and about 10 days later, my younger sister, Nancy, wrote me a beautiful letter welcoming me to the Ridley family. It came as an email, but really it was a letter.
Wow.
And later, when I met her for the first time, she told me she'd taken a whole Sunday to think about and compose that message. And I just shared a WhatsApp message with Wendy a little earlier today. I was in Wales with her husband at the moment. And I just exchanged emails with my birth father last night and this morning. And so
you're in it.
So,
this is.
I'm totally in it. And by the way, my birth father is bigger than me, and my 3 paternal brothers are all quite a bit bigger than me. And I'm like a really big guy.
Like how big? How tall are you?
I'm 6'2", 240 pounds, 46-inch chest.
Yeah. Big dude.
I stand next to my brothers, and I look smaller. And it's been very fascinating to really be in the presence of my DNA and really see where it comes from. But last April, my sister called me, and my birth mother, and my sisters had let me know that my birth mother was an alcoholic. And I also had a brother, Gary, who I never met because he died in 2015 of cirrhosis of the liver as a direct result of his alcoholism. And in April, my sister called me and said, Terry's just been admitted to the hospital with a brain tumor, and she doesn't have very long to live. That was like a Saturday. I talked to them Sunday. I flew out Monday. Tuesday morning, all of the Ridley clan, my aunt, my uncle, my sisters, they all invited me to the hospital room. And at that point, my birth mother was unconscious, so she couldn't object to my presence. And that was the first time I'd been in her presence since I'd been relinquished at birth. And she probably never held me at birth, because that wouldn't have been the thing you do in 1957. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, it was just incredibly moving to have the Ridley family, invite me there. Mm-hmm. And, for me, like, the personal growth is that I can sit and be with them, and I can be their brother. Mm-hmm. And, I can just be with my feelings. And a couple hours later, Terry passed away and took her last breath in that hospital bed. And, we all cried, and I don't know if I was crying for Terry or whether I was crying for what never could be, or I was just crying because my Ridley family was crying, and they lost their mom and their sister. And after we'd all, kind of settled back down, my Uncle Jim turned to me and he said, I was standing pretty close to the bed at that point, just because he said, "Do you want a picture with Terry?" And I tell you, my brain was no effing way.
Because of the circumstance that Terry had passed,
because
or
of being
because
rejected,
of like a resentment?
Resentment,
yeah,
right?
Okay.
But I was able to catch it in the moment. I never said anything, so it's a big chunk of personal growth.
Yeah.
And I also realized I had no picture of me and my birth mother, and I never would if I didn't take it right then.
Yeah.
And so I said, "Yeah, Jim," and I handed him my phone and turned the camera on, and I kneeled down next to my birth mom and took the picture. And then I stood up and paused for a second, and then I kissed her on the cheek and I wished her well. She never got this program. She carried the toxic shame of my birth for her entire life, for 65 years. She was shamed for it by her mother, as far as I can tell. And the next day, my brother and sisters went to her place, and there was an open bottle of Canadian rye whiskey in the kitchen cupboard, and there was a case of 12 in the closet. So I was curious whether she was practicing alcoholic up to the end, and I'm going to say that was affirmative. And yep, and probably in no small part caused her brain tumor. Who knows?
Yeah.
The unknowable, right?
Yeah.
But the gift of all of this work is, my presence with all of my families, because family is like one of my most important values. Mm-hmm. My family relationships. Like, and my mom is 96 years old, lives independently in Edmonton. I had a great half an hour conversation with her this afternoon, as it happens.
Really?
I called her from Mexico and gave her the latest news on her grandkids and great grandkids, and I caught up on her news, and we had a really nice visit. Wow. And I go see her every 6 months. I go to Edmonton just so I can be with her, because it means a lot to me. It means a lot to her. Yeah. And I see my brother and sister. And then I've really worked hard at developing this whole circle of relationships with my maternal and paternal families.
You know what? I think we're going to leave it right there. Mm-hmm. Usually I ask if there's anything you'd like to leave us with, but I think you nailed it down pretty good, man.
I don't know how to make it much better than that.
Yeah. All right. Well, David, it was a pleasure having you. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's it, man. Take care of yourself.
And thank you so much for having me and for all the work that you do.
Take care, David.
Thank you so much, David. Take care.
Bye now.
All right, if you got something out of that tonight and you are watching on YouTube, please click that subscribe button. If you're not already subscribed, turn on notifications. Give us a like. We go live every Friday morning, every Sunday evening, right here on the channel. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. That's all I got for you tonight. Take care, my friends.
Say, this is Hard Knocks Talks.